The orphanage and Raven's suffering. The moon hung high in the ink-black sky, casting its cold light through the narrow, grimy windows of the orphanage. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and despair. Raven's trembling. Hands scrubbed the stone floor, each movement a silent cry of exhaustion. Her fingers were raw, blistered, and bleeding from hours of relentless labor, the harsh strokes of the rag scraping against the unforgiving stone. Every breath she took felt like fire in her chest, her ribs still aching from the last beating. Pain was her constant companion here, a reminder that in this place, nothing else mattered, except for the work. Beside her, Ella worked in silence, her once vibrant eyes now dull and lifeless, staring at the wooden plank she was forced to polish, until her hands bled. There was no room for rest, no space for the luxury of hope. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the cruel crack of Mrs. Dunley's whip, echoing through the narrow hallways. It wasn't just the air that was heavy, it was the weight of the punishment, the constant reminder that even the smallest imperfection would be met with cruelty. A speck of dust, a misaligned sheet. The slightest mistake would result in more lashes, more hunger, more torment. Raven had lived in this orphanage for a decade, ever since the day her parents were executed by the former Alpha for their crime of being rogues. The punishment had been swift, and she had been left behind, too young to fight, too powerless to escape. Every day since, she had scraped by in the shadows, clinging to life as the world outside spun, indifferent to her suffering. She was just another orphan, another discarded child, hidden away from the world. She had long since learned that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tonight was no different. The air was thick with the weight of impending doom, and the orphanage felt more like a prison than ever before. The night before Ella's 18th birthday, the two girls huddled in the corner of the hallway, their bodies battered and bruised, silently preparing for what was to come. Ella's birthday had always been a mark of terror, a reminder that when a rogue turned 18, their life was forfeit. They were to be executed without question, their bloodline deemed a threat to the pack. Raven had accepted this fate long ago. She had come to terms with the fact that she wouldn't survive to see the next year. But the night before Ella's birthday, something changed. A chilling announcement rang out, and Raven's heart sank as she learned her own fate would be sealed, alongside Ella's. She wasn't even granted the last 2 months she had been holding on to as a fragile thread of life. The terror that gripped her was worse than any beating she had endured. The truth was clear now. There was no escape, no way out. Far beyond the orphanage's walls, in the far reaches of the Pack's territory, the Lycan King had taken personal interest in the growing number of rogue children being captured and executed. His people, superior in strength and bloodline, ruled the shifter realm with absolute authority. And while he rarely interfered in the affairs of other packs, the systematic slaughter of innocent children had caught his attention. His sense of justice, twisted as it might have been, could not allow this atrocity to continue. Raven had heard whispers of the king's investigation, of his growing anger at the cruelty of the packs. She'd heard stories of his strength, his power, his cold, calculating nature. But to Raven, all of that seemed far away, distant, like a dream she could never reach. She had no reason to believe that someone like him would care about the fate of a rogue orphan. But as the days passed and the whispers grew louder, something shifted. Mrs. Dunley's cruelty intensified, her demands more severe as the day of reckoning approached. Raven and Ella were forced to clean every inch of the orphanage under threat of punishment. There would be no mercy, no reprieve. Not for them. Not now. As the night drew near, Raven felt the weight of her fate pressing down on her, but deep inside, there was a flicker of something, a strange hope, a quiet yearning that perhaps, just perhaps, something might change. And then, It happened. The sound of engines echoed through the hollow halls. Raven's heart leapt in her chest as a convoy of black luxury cars rolled to a stop outside the orphanage. For the briefest moment, she allowed herself to hope. Could it be him? Could the king have arrived early, offering her salvation? But as the doors of the cars opened, a group of sharply dressed men stepped out. One of them stood apart from the others, his presence commanding, his every step exuding an authority that sent a chill down Raven's spine. She dared glance up for just a moment, but quickly looked away, her rogue status forbidding her from making eye contact. But it was enough. His eyes, his piercing gray eyes seemed to linger on her for the briefest of moments, as if he knew something, as if he recognized something in her that she couldn't understand. As Mrs. Dunley hurried to greet them, Raven felt a strange pull in her chest. She didn't know who this man was, but his presence unsettled her. There was something about him, something powerful, something dangerous. Her pulse quickened as she caught a glimpse of him, her heart racing. Who was he? And why did his gaze send such a strange, intoxicating thrill through her? Fear gripped her. They were so close to death, so close to losing everything, and yet there was something in this man's eyes that made her hesitate, something that stirred a strange, unknown longing. The looming threat. Ella's birthday and the new Alpha's execution decree. A cold dread settled over the orphanage as each day passed like a death sentence. Raven and Ella had grown up together within these bleak walls, sharing whispered secrets and stolen moments of camaraderie in the midst of unspeakable hardship. Every night in their cramped, shadowed corner, they clutched each other tightly, silently promising survival in a world that showed them only cruelty. As Ella's 18th birthday loomed ever closer, the atmosphere in the orphanage grew unbearably heavy. It was as if the passage of time itself was a cruel enemy, drawing nearer with every tick of the clock. For rogues like them, reaching adulthood was not a rite of passage, but a death sentence, a decree proclaimed by the new Alpha, whose merciless rule had already turned hope into a fading memory. One cold evening, as rain drummed softly against the crumbling stone walls, Raven sat beside Ella on their threadbare cot. The flickering light of a dying candle cast trembling shadows on their gaunt faces. Ella's eyes, once filled with a naive spark, were now clouded with resignation and fear. "Raven," Ella whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you think there will ever be a day when we can live without this fear?" Raven's heart ached at the sound of her friend's question, an echo of all the silent, desperate prayers they had both murmured in the dark. "I don't know, Ella," she replied softly, brushing her scarred cheek with trembling fingers. "Every time the day draws near, it feels like we're marked for death. I try to hold on to even the smallest hope, but sometimes it's hard to see beyond the darkness." The memory of their shared past haunted them, each scar and bruise a story of the orphanage's relentless punishment. They recalled long nights filled with whispered plans of escape, and huddled dreams of a world where the injustice of their birth didn't condemn them to such cruelty. Yet, every time hope flickered, the harsh reality of the new Alpha's decree cast a long shadow over their fragile aspirations. For years, they had endured, working tirelessly in exchange for nothing more than survival. But now the decree was clear. All rogues must meet their end upon reaching adulthood, their lives snuffed out without mercy. The very thought was suffocating, a noxious haze that filled their lungs and tightened its grip around their hearts. Raven's internal monologue was a storm of emotions, a frantic battle between the instinct to survive and the resignation to fate. Late at night, when the whispers of the wind merged with the distant clamor of punishment, she would lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if there was any way out. Is it possible, she would think, that fate has dealt us an unfair hand? How do we continue when death feels inevitable? The more she contemplated, the deeper the chasm of despair grew. Despite the crushing dread, the bond between Raven and Ella remained a stubborn ember, refusing to be extinguished by the world's cruelty. They had built a silent language of understanding, glance shared in the hallway, a touch of reassurance in the midst of a beating, that conveyed more than words ever could. Every scar on their skin was a testament not only to the pain endured, but also to the strength forged from unyielding unity. One humid afternoon, while the decrepit walls of the orphanage reverberated with another round of punishment, Raven and Ella found a brief respite in their hidden corner. With hushed voices and eyes locked in mutual understanding, they spoke in desperate tones about the coming day. "Tomorrow, it will be here," Ella said quietly, her voice shuddering with a mix of fear and defiance. "I know," Raven replied, her tone firm despite the quivering in her heart. "But we can't let them break us completely. We must hold on, to each other, to every small bit of hope left inside us." Their whispered dialogue, filled with both vulnerability and the will to survive, stitched together the frayed edges of their souls. In that tender moment, the horrors of the day seemed to recede, replaced by the spark of resilience that shone ever so briefly amid. Yet, looming over their whispered promises was the stark reality of the new Alpha's reign. Ruthless and unyielding, he had decreed that no rogue was to live past their 18th birthday. His methods were as cold as the steel of a freshly forged sword, his decisions final and unchallengeable. The decree had spread a wave of terror that enveloped every corner of the orphanage, turning every heartbeat into a countdown toward inevitable doom. The new Alpha's ruthless stance was not merely a policy but a declaration that there would be no exceptions, no quarter given for those deemed unworthy by his design. His resolve transformed the orphanage from a mere prison into a death trap, every chore, every beat of punishment, all a prelude to the final act of execution. And with each passing day, that prelude grew louder, its drumbeat echoing the march toward a future void of mercy. Raven's mind raced with desperate thoughts, while her body moved mechanically through the daily grind. The fear of imminent death was a constant companion, shadowing her every step. And yet, even in the depths of despair, the flicker of resilience burned on, a stubborn ember that whispered of survival, even when the world seemed determined to snuff it out. In the dead of night, as the weight of the forthcoming day pressed down upon her, Raven clung to the memory of lighter times. A time before the cruelty, before the decree turned their world into a maze of hopelessness. But those memories seemed so distant now, nearly as if they belonged to another life altogether. Her mind was filled with questions. How does one find strength when every heartbeat reminds you of impending death? And how can they possibly fight a power so absolute? Together, Raven and Ella navigated their bleak world with the frail hope that somehow, against all odds, their bond could be the key to a future where they might live, not just exist. Their silent resolve, forged under the weight of relentless punishment and the cold tyranny of the new Alpha, was the only spark of light in an overwhelmingly dark existence. As the day of reckoning drew closer, every moment was charged with a mix of terror and determination, a desperate struggle to preserve even the faintest memory of themselves. The looming threat of execution was both a curse and a catalyst, igniting in them a fierce, unspoken promise that no matter how grim their fate, they would not let the darkness claim their soul. Raven's last hope. The King's investigation. Beyond the suffocating walls of the orphanage, whispers of a distant power began to stir. A power that defied the cruelty of the new Alpha. Raven had heard murmurs, carried on the breath of frightened servants and timid guards, of a king whose heart burned with a rare, almost unheard of compassion for the suffering of rogues. His name, King Lucian, was spoken in hushed tones, a forbidden hope in a realm where hope was otherwise extinguished by fear and death. In the dark corridors of the shifter realm, Lucian, a formidable figure revered for his superior strength and unyielding authority, had taken it upon himself to investigate the systematic execution of rogue children. With each account of brutal punishment and untimely death, his sense of justice grew more incendiary. Unlike his peers, whose indifference only deepened the abyss of cruelty, Lucian could not ignore the mounting evidence of a system gone awry. To him, the execution of innocent children was not a matter of old blood feuds or age-old decrees. It was a moral abomination. As Raven labored under the weight of ceaseless punishments, a spark of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to kindle. Within her, the very thought that King Lucian might be on his way to set things right was enough to momentarily lift the oppressive gloom that had long defined her existence. Though the details were shrouded in mystery, the notion that the king would personally intervene stirred an unfamiliar resonance in her heart, a feeling that perhaps fate, cruel as it was, might offer her a lifeline. King Lucian was not known for frivolous acts of mercy. His reputation was built upon a legacy of power and decisive action. His presence commanded respect, his authority unchallenged across vast territories of the shifter realm. Rumors said that his eyes could inspire both hope and dread, an unyielding gaze that saw through deceit and cruelty alike. Yet, amid this hardened exterior lay a tempest of emotions that he kept buried, hidden away from the prying eyes of his court. The plight of the rogues, particularly the innocent children condemned to a premature death, ignited a moral outrage within him that few could comprehend. Every report of a rogue child being executed, every whispered tale of orphanages where punishment was meted out with brutal regularity, fanned the flames of Lucian's outrage. In his quiet moments, when the weight of his responsibilities eased for just an instant, he would pore over the evidence gathered by his trusted emissaries. His fists would clench in fury, and his mind would race with thoughts of vengeance and justice, a justice that would right the wrongs inflicted by a heartless regime. In these moments, his inner conflict was palpable. He wrestled silently with his emotions, caught between the rigid demands of law and the searing injustice of a system that sacrificed the innocent. Back at the orphanage, Raven found herself haunted by these distant rumors. In the scarce moments of respite, stolen from punishing labor, the words King Lucian echoed like a mantra in her mind. Though she could not fully comprehend his motivations or the extent of his power, the mere possibility of his intervention offered a trembling glimmer of hope. It was as if a lifeline had been thrown into the chasm of despair, a possibility that someone of such unmatched authority might be moved by the suffering of those deemed unworthy by the pack's merciless decree. Late one night, as Raven crouched in a shadowed corner to catch a few stolen moments of sleep, she overheard the hushed conversation of a few frightened servants. They spoke of the king's investigation with a mix of awe and disbelief. "They say King Lucian is coming himself," one whispered, his voice trembling. "He cannot abide the thought of innocent lives being lost on mere prejudice." Another replied, "The king's anger is unlike anything this realm has seen. His resolve, it might even save us from our fate." Although these words came to Raven like fleeting fragments of a dream, they etched themselves deep within her soul. In that darkness, every murmur of his name strengthened her resolve to endure, even as despair threatened to consume her entirely. Even as the chains of routine labor and the whip's harsh cadence resonated daily within those grim walls, the notion of King Lucian's investigation began to alter the landscape of Raven's internal world. She would close her eyes and imagine a world where his voice, resonant, commanding, and deeply compassionate, would shatter the silence of persecution. In those brief, stolen moments, she pictured a figure draped in regal authority, his eyes smoldering with restrained fury as he vowed to vanquish cruelty. For Raven, this was not just the distant sound of an approaching storm, but the promise of change, a spark that could rekindle the dying embers of hope. Though uncertainty still shrouded his true intentions, the mere possibility of King Lucian's intervention edged its way into Raven's thoughts, like the first light of dawn breaking through a pitch-black night. And in that fragile, trembling hope, she began to believe that even in a world built on suffering and despair, the seeds of redemption might. The king arrives, a glimmer of hope. As the days bled into one another under the oppressive weight of routine punishments, the air within the orphanage shifted ever so slightly. Mrs. Dunley, ever the embodiment of cruelty, had grown even more relentless in the days leading up to the king's imminent arrival. Her eyes flashed with a bitter anticipation, and every command she barked came laced with an unsettling urgency. The sound of her whip snapping against the stone floor was now punctuated by a charged silence, as if even the walls trembled in expectation of what was to come. In the midst of this mounting tension, Raven and Ella continued their endless labor with a desperate dignity. Their bodies, scarred and exhausted from endless rounds of punishment, moved with a mechanical precision born of survival. Yet, beneath that mechanical exterior, every muscle and every heartbeat betrayed the raw fragility of their existence. They clung to small rituals, quiet words exchanged in the stillness between lashings, a fleeting touch of hand that spoke of mutual support, each one a silent plea to hold on, even as the darkness of despair threatened to engulf them. Late one. Stormy afternoon. As rain battered the roof and the wind howled like a harbinger of fate, the distant rumble of engines cut through the oppressive drone of daily misery. The sound grew steadily louder, vibrating through the cold stone corridors of the orphanage. It was a sound that sparked both dread and an ember of hope deep within Raven's heart. Every nerve in her body tensed, and for a moment, she allowed herself to dream of escape, even as the fear of the unknown kept her rooted to the spot. Outside, a convoy of sleek black luxury vehicles had finally arrived. Their presence was as incongruous in this desolate place as a beacon of light in pitch darkness. As the vehicles came to a halt, a group of men in sharply tailored suits stepped out, their expressions unreadable, yet exuding an authority that commanded silence and respect. Among them was one man whose piercing gaze seemed to cut through the very fabric of the night, a beta sent by the king himself. His eyes, a steely gray that held the weight of countless battles, briefly met Raven's own, and in that split second, she felt a shiver of recognition mingled with inexplicable unease. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause. The beta's look was not one of mere indifference. It was as if he saw something in Raven that defied her tattered exterior, a spark of defiance, of sorrow, and perhaps a hint of a hidden power. His gaze was intense, almost hypnotic, and it left a residue of mystery that clung to Raven's thoughts, long after it had passed. Though she was acutely aware that her life had been defined by cruelty and suffering, that fleeting encounter stirred something deep inside her, a whisper of possibility, of a destiny that might yet be rewritten. Meanwhile, inside the orphanage, Mrs. Dunley's actions grew increasingly erratic. She barked orders with a desperation that betrayed her own fear of the king's arrival, disrupting the established order. The cruelty with which she meted out. Punishment escalated, driven by a twisted need to prove her worth in the eyes of the unknown visitors. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed through the halls as she rounded on the children, leaving behind trails of fresh wounds and silent tears. The oppressive atmosphere became almost tangible, thick with a potent mix of terror and anticipation, each moment carrying the heavy promise of imminent change. Raven's mind, already a turbulent mix of pain and resignation, was now assaulted by new, conflicting emotions. The beta's gaze had planted a seed, an inkling of hope that this might be the turning point in their relentless nightmare. But it was tempered by the dread of what might come next. Was this moment a prelude to salvation, or would it simply herald another form of torment? The uncertainty gnawed at her, each thought a duel between the instinct to trust and the instinct to flee from further anguish. In a rare moment of quiet during a lull in the chaos, Raven found herself hidden away in a corner of the dilapidated hall. With trembling fingers, she recalled every whispered conversation among the servants, every rumor of King Lucian's investigation into the atrocities committed against rogue children. The king, a figure wrapped in both legend and fear, was said to possess not only unmatched strength and authority, but also an empathy so rare that it defied the very nature of their brutal world. His arrival, though shrouded in mystery, was a harbinger of change, a promise that the scales of injustice might finally be tipped in favor of the downtrodden. As the beta continued his silent vigil among the arriving dignitaries, his presence seemed to hint at a deeper, more personal connection with Raven, something not yet fully understood, but powerful enough to send ripples through the stagnant despair of her existence. Every detail of his demeanor, every calculated step he took, exuded a quiet assurance that stirred a long-dormant part of her heart. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Raven dared to entertain a fragile hope. Perhaps in the midst of this relentless cruelty, there was a chance for redemption, a chance that her suffering might not be in vain. The tension was palpable as the convoys settled, and the visitors began their business with the hardened staff. Every moment felt stretched taut, like a bowstring pulled to the breaking point, waiting for the arrow of destiny to fly. In that charged atmosphere, where the line between fear and hope blurred into a surreal tapestry of uncertain futures, Raven's eyes searched the crowd for more signs, a furtive glance, a subtle nod, anything to suggest that the king's intervention might be more than mere rumor. And though the initial encounter with the beta had left her with more questions than answers, it also ignited a spark deep within her, a spark that promised that change, however faint and fragile, was finally on the horizon. In that suspended moment, with every heartbeat echoing like a drum of war in the silent hall, Raven began to understand that the arrival of King Lucian, and the mysterious man who bore the king's mark, could be the turning point she had long been waiting for. The glimmer of hope, however small, was enough to make her believe that perhaps there was a future beyond this relentless cycle of pain and despair. And as the cold night deepened around her, that hope mingled with her fear, leaving her poised on the precipice of an uncertain, yet deeply anticipated, the execution and Lucian's intervention. The square was draped in a grim silence as the executioners prepared for the inevitable. Under the pale light of dawn, every soul present felt the heavy weight of foregone doom. The crowd had gathered, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding in unison with the ticking seconds. At the center stood the Alpha, his cold eyes fixed on the condemned, a pair of trembling figures, Raven and Ella, bound by fate and shackled by cruelty. The sun's weak rays struggled to penetrate the thick haze of despair that shrouded the area, highlighting the stark contrast between the darkness of punishment and the faint glimmer of hope that was about to emerge. Raven's heart thundered in her ears as she felt her hands tremble, not just from exhaustion, but from the cold dread of an execution that was imminent. Every bruise on her delicate skin pulsed with the memory of the prior beatings, each one a silent testament to the enduring cruelty of her life. Ella stood beside her, her eyes wide with terror, but also a resigned acceptance that left an indelible mark of sorrow on her youthful face. Their shared history of unyielding torment was etched deeply in every tear and scar, a bond forged in suffering that no decree could sever. In the distance, an almost imperceptible rumble began to grow louder, until it swelled into a thunderous roar that sent a shiver down the spines of all present. The Alpha's confident posture faltered for a moment as the sound approached, a sound that carried both the promise of retribution and the weight of undeniable authority. It was not long before a sleek, dark convoy burst onto the scene, its presence slicing through the oppressive gloom like a blade of hope. From the lead vehicle emerged a figure whose mere stature demanded attention, a figure that instantly altered the course of destiny in that forsaken square. King Lucian stepped forward, his arrival shattering the stale silence as if the very air recoiled in his presence. Clad in dark regal attire and exuding a power that was both ancient and awe-inspiring, Lucian's eyes swept over the gathered crowd with a mix of controlled fury and stoic resolve. Every step he took toward the execution platform was measured, each movement a silent command that brooked no opposition. The murmurs of the crowd died to a hushed, breathless anticipation as the king's authority swept over them, stifling any pretense of defiance. For a heartbeat, the entire square held its breath. The Alpha, caught off guard, gripped his weapon, tighter, a sword that had tasted the blood of many rogues before. His eyes narrowed, uncertainty flickering for the first time, yet his voice managed to break the lingering silence with a callous declaration. "These rogues, this filth, will pay the price," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Before the blade could descend upon Raven, a deep, commanding voice resonated through the square. "You cannot execute her." The words, carved with power, rang out with an authority that froze even the most hardened hearts. All eyes shifted toward King Lucian, who now stood front and center, a living embodiment of retribution. Raven's world slowed, her senses overwhelmed by shock and a sudden surge of hope. She stared, her eyes wide with disbelief, as Lucian stepped forward, his gaze locked on hers. "Her death is unlawful," he proclaimed, his voice unwavering and filled with a righteous fury. Every syllable carried the weight of his conviction, reverberating off the cold, unyielding stone. The decree of execution was rendered null by his mere intervention, a challenge to the cruel edicts that had plagued Raven and Ella for so long. The Alpha hesitated, his confident veneer crumbling in the face of Lucian's overwhelming presence. With a shaky hand, he lowered his weapon, the glint of his blade now dull and disbelieving. The crowd, previously bound by terror, found themselves suspended in a state of uncertain silence, as if the world itself had momentarily forgotten to breathe. The atmosphere was charged, every eye fixed on Lucian, each listener teetering between fear and a burgeoning sense of relief. Raven's inner turmoil was a maelstrom. Fear, disbelief, and a flicker of tentative hope danced wildly within her. She could hardly comprehend that the execution, the very moment she had resigned herself to as the end, was being halted by a force greater than her suffering. Her mind raced, questioning if this was a cruel twist of fate or the first real promise of salvation she had ever known. In that breathless moment, her eyes met Lucian's, a moment of profound connection that spoke of a destiny yet to be fulfilled. Lucian's presence was magnetic and unyielding, his features chiseled with both authority and a subdued, empathetic sadness conveyed a deep inner conflict. He was a king who had seen too many unjust deaths, and his heart pounded with the desire to right a wrong that had gone unchecked for far too long. His intervention was not born merely of duty, but of a genuine, almost imperceptible connection to the person before him, a connection that defied the rigid lines of class and decree. "Stand down," Lucian ordered, his tone final as he extended, a hand toward the Alpha, whose posture faltered under the king's relentless gaze. The Alpha, now a mere shadow of his former self, complied with a reluctant nod, the might of his authority extinguished by the force of Lucian's will. As the reality of his intervention began to sink in, Raven's shock mingled with a dawning hope. The risk of an uncertain future was palpable, and her heart, battered from endless suffering, now dared to beat a little faster with the promise of rescue. Lucian had shifted the very fabric of her fate with his decisive act, a disruption of the cruel cycle that had defined her existence. In that singular seismic moment, the execution was halted. The king's intervention marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with uncertainty, immense potential, and a promise of protection. For Raven, the blade of her fate had been pulled back, and though the road ahead would be fraught with struggle, she now clung to the belief that in Lucian's powerful presence lay the hope of a future beyond the torment. Lucian's protectiveness grows. The journey begins. In the aftermath of the halted execution, the cold dread of the orphanage was replaced by a tense and unexpected relief. With the alpha subdued and the crowd left in silent awe, Lucian swiftly moved to secure Raven and Ella. While guards gently unshackled their wrists, the air pulsed with both hope and lingering terror. Raven, still trembling from the shock of the day's horrors, was carefully helped to her feet. Lucian's eyes, as intense as they were compassionate, met hers one last time before he ushered her away from the square and into the awaiting convoy. As the sleek vehicles whisked them away from the life of perpetual torment, the oppressive scenery of the orphanage receded into the distance, replaced gradually by the unfamiliar landscape of Lucian's realm. The journey was marked by an uneasy stillness. Through the tinted windows, Raven watched the world blur by, a mix of winding roads and distant mountains under an endless sky that seemed almost indifferent to her suffering. The transition from a place of unrelenting cruelty to one of absolute order and beauty was jarring, and she clung to every fleeting detail as if they were fragments of a dream. Within the secure confines of the convoy, Lucian maintained a vigilant watch over Raven. His protective instinct, once dormant behind his regal composure, now surged to the fore with every whispered murmur of her pain. He studied her, noting the way she flinched at every jolt of the car, and how her eyes, though clouded with fear, held a glimmer of cautious hope. In those silent moments, his mind was a tumult of questions. Why did his heart, hardened by years of leadership and burdened with the weight of unyielding authority, suddenly beat in tumultuous rhythm at the sight of this fragile rogue? The answer eluded him, buried beneath layers of duty and stoic resolve, yet its pull was undeniable. Lucian's inner conflict grew with each passing mile. He was a king known for his unwavering sense of justice and unyielding command, a figure whose power was admired throughout his realm. And yet, here was Raven, a girl scarred by cruelty, a mere rogue in the eyes of society, who stirred something deep within him. His protective fervor was not born solely of duty. It was laced with a personal ache he struggled to comprehend. Every time he glanced at her, he felt an inexplicable warmth, a dangerous tenderness that challenged his long-held notions of order and propriety. He chided himself silently, uncertain if it was merely pity or something far more profound stirring in his heart. For her part, Raven wrestled with a surge of conflicting emotions. Amid the residual terror from her past, she sensed an unfamiliar kindness emanating from Lucian, a kindness so stark against the cruelty she had known that it was almost surreal. Yet, deep within her, fear and suspicion lingered. Could someone who once ruled with an iron fist truly offer protection and compassion? Was his intervention not just another cruel twist of fate meant to manipulate her for purposes she could not grasp? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and as Lucian guided her through the grand gates of his kingdom, each step felt like a descent into an unknown future. The entrance to Lucian's castle was both magnificent and imposing, a testament to a realm built on strength and discipline. Gleaming stone walls lined with intricate carvings towered above her, and torches cast dancing shadows along long, echoing corridors. As they stepped inside, the chill of the night was replaced by a carefully controlled warmth that seemed to speak of an orderly grace. Yet, even in such grandeur, Raven felt a palpable tension. The air was charged with the unspoken weight of history and power, and every step forward felt like crossing a threshold from a world of despair into one governed by new yet equally enigmatic. Lucian led her to a quiet chamber at the heart of the castle, a room bathed in soft golden light that seemed almost to exude a sense of calm. There, with no words spoken, the two shared a moment of fragile solitude. Raven's eyes wandered over the room's lavish details, the heavy velvet drapes, the ornate furniture, the subtle but pervasive scent of sandalwood and ancient parchment. It was a stark contrast to the grim, barren space of the orphanage, yet the beauty only deepened her sense of alienation. She could not shake the feeling that beneath the castle's opulence lay burdens as heavy as her own, secrets and pain hidden behind every polished surface. In that charged silence, Lucian's inner turmoil became visible in the slight furrow of his brow and the restless shifting of his gaze. He spoke in a low, measured tone, as if choosing his words with the precision of a seasoned warrior. "You are safe here, Raven," he assured her, his voice steady yet imbued with a personal intensity. "No harm will come to you under my watch." His proclamation, simple yet profound, hung in the air like a promise that diverged sharply from the cruelty she had endured for so long. Raven's heart pounded as she absorbed his words, each syllable a double-edged sword of comfort and uncertainty. She could almost believe him, clinging to the hope that his intervention might herald a genuine transformation in her fate. But the scars on her soul cautioned her against easy trust. With trembling hands, she reached out in a tentative gesture of acceptance, unsure if it was the touch of genuine care or the calculated strategy of a powerful king. Thus began the tentative formation of an unspoken bond, a connection woven from the threads of shared pain, fragile hope, and the unyielding desire for redemption. Lucian's protectiveness grew with each passing moment as he sought to shield Raven not merely from external threats, but from the internal demons that had long haunted her. And in this crucible of conflict and compassion, both king and rogue found themselves standing at the brink of an uncertain future, a future that might yet hold the promise of healing if only they dared to face the truth of their intertwined destinies. The mate bond unfolds Raven's transformation. In the hushed solitude of her private chamber, Raven felt the stirrings of something new, a deep, latent current that pulsed along her veins, igniting long-dormant parts of her soul. The soft, golden light that bathed the room seemed to breathe life into her weary form, and for the first time in an eternity, she sensed that her body was changing. It began subtly at first, a tingling sensation that spread from her fingertips and toes, as if an unseen force was awakening the animal within. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heart flutter erratically, caught in a tumult of fear, confusion, and inexplicable yearning. Lucian stood a few paces away, his gaze fixed on Raven with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Every line of his face was etched with a possessiveness he struggled to conceal. He had seen many transform in his long rule over the shifter realm, but the sight of Raven's metamorphosis stirred something raw and primal within him. As her skin began to shimmer with an almost ethereal luminescence, he felt a surge of emotion. Both, protective and fiercely possessive, threatening to spill over. His mind raced, questioning the nature of this sudden bond, wondering if fate had finally revealed its most intimate secret, that Raven was not merely a victim of cruel circumstance, but his destined mate. Raven's thoughts, however, were a maelstrom of conflict. She had long resisted the notion of any deep connection, guarding her heart against further pain. The idea that she could belong to someone, that a king could have such intimate claim over her, was both terrifying and intoxicating. As the transformation intensified, subtle changes began to reveal themselves. Her eyes, once a dull gray marked by suffering, now shimmered with a deep, unknowable hue, a mirror reflecting the tumult within. Her once fragile frame radiated a newfound strength that, despite its allure, left her feeling exposed and uncertain of what the future might hold. I don't understand," she murmured, her voice quivering as she fought to steady herself against the intensity of the change. Every word was weighted with both fear of the unknown and a reluctant wonder at the power stirring within her. The sensation was overwhelming, a blend of fear, exhilaration, and an unspoken promise of something greater waiting just beyond the threshold of pain. Lucian stepped forward, his presence filling the room with a commanding warmth. "Raven," he said, his voice a low, resolute cadence that resonated within her like a heartbeat. "You are more than the torment you have endured. This power, this transformation, it is your birthright, and I will not let anyone or anything take that from you." His words were both an assertion of his protective nature and a confession of a bond that was rapidly deepening. In that moment, the air between them crackled with the unspoken truth that their destinies were now entwined. Yet, even as Lucian's declaration stirred a protective fire within him, Raven's heart trembled with uncertainty. The connection he spoke of was unlike anything she had ever known, a raw, almost overwhelming force that both frightened and attracted her. "But what if I lose myself?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if this bond consumes the me I once knew?" Her eyes darted away from his, searching the shadows of the dim room for reassurance, for some sign that she might survive this metamorphosis intact. Lucian's jaw tightened as he absorbed her trembling plea. His internal struggle was apparent to anyone who truly looked into his eyes, a turmoil between the fierce need to protect and the fear of causing further harm. He had long been a bastion of unwavering strength, yet here he stood, vulnerable before the undeniable force of their bond. "I cannot promise that nothing will change," he admitted softly. "But I can promise that I will be with you through it all. You are my mate, Raven, destined to be more than just a shadow of your past." His voice, filled with both resolve and a hint of desperate passion, echoed around them, solidifying the shift that had begun in both their hearts. Slowly, as if responding to his words, the transformation in Raven accelerated. The ageless magic of the shifter blood coursed through her, calling forth an image of both beauty and ferocity. A silvery glow danced along her skin, outlining the contours of her body in a way that made her appear both ethereal and fierce. She felt the first stirrings of her inner wolf, a presence that demanded acknowledgement, a raw, wild component that had been suppressed for far too long. In that moment, her dual nature surged forth, a stunning visual of grace and power intertwined. For Lucian, witnessing this awakening was both a vindication and an emotional upheaval. His possessive attachment hardened into an almost tangible force, and he found his eyes lingering on every subtle change, every shift in the light as it traced the curve of her emerging form. The realization that she was, indeed, his mate, a destiny long foretold in the ancient texts of his realm, filled him with an overwhelming mix of certainty and fear. He struggled internally. Could he bear the depths of this connection? Could he truly accept the vulnerability that came with loving a soul so scarred yet so magnificent? As the transformative energies swirled around Raven and wove her new identity, the chamber was filled with a silence heavy with both awe and trepidation. The once timid and broken girl was becoming something entirely new, a beacon of resilience, power, and raw, untamed beauty. And in that crucible of change, the unspoken promise between her and Lucian deepened. Their bond transcended the boundaries of duty and destiny. It was a declaration of a future where pain could give way to unimaginable strength, where even the darkest past could be transformed into a source of profound connection. In that ephemeral space, as magic and emotion intertwined, Lucian and Raven stood on the precipice of an irrevocable change, a moment suspended in time where love, fate, and power converged into a singular, life-altering truth. The truth revealed. Lucian's confession, in a quiet chamber lit only by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through ancient windows, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The echoes of Raven's transformation still lingered, a spectral reminder of the power that had surged through her, awakening the dormant spirit of a warrior within. In that fragile, suspended moment, Lucian stepped forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that defied the stillness of the room. His voice, low and trembling with emotion, broke through the silence like a thunderclap, heralding a truth that both would soon have to accept. "Raven," he began, his tone both commanding and tender. "I can no longer hide the truth." His words, laden with raw vulnerability, stirred something deep within her, a mix of fear, disbelief, and an almost unrecognizable hope. She regarded him with wide, uncertain eyes, the remnants of her old life still etched in every scar, every tear. For so long, kindness had been a stranger to her, and love an impossibility. Now, standing before her, a king, formidable, powerful, and impossibly human, had come to shatter every notion she held about her existence. Lucian's face, usually set in stoic determination, was now etched with an unmistakable strain. He drew a tentative breath before continuing. You are not merely a rogue condemned to the shadows of your past. You, Raven, are my mate. This bond, it is as undeniable as the blood that courses through our veins. Each word resonated with the truth of a destiny written in ancient lines, a fate that transcended the cruelty of their worlds. The revelation struck Raven like a tidal wave. Shock and disbelief warred within her, her mind reeling at the sheer impossibility of his confession. Had she, who had known nothing but despair and the relentless cruelty of an unforgiving existence, ever been seen as worthy of love? The idea was as foreign as it was terrifying. For a long moment, she could only stare at him, her thoughts a chaotic storm of emotion. Could it be real? Was it possible that someone so powerful and resolute could find solace in her brokenness? Lucian's eyes, a stormy gray filled with an intensity that bordered on painful, searched hers for understanding. I know you're frightened, and I know you believe kindness and love to be illusions of a world you once dreamed of, he confessed, his tone softening. But every time I looked at you, every time I felt that inexplicable pull, I knew there was something extraordinary within you, a strength, a light that defied the darkness you've endured. His words came not as idle promises, but as a heartfelt revelation born from countless battles fought on the outside and within his own soul. As he spoke, the room seemed to tremble with the magnitude of his declaration. The protective armor he had long worn, forged in the fires of duty and power, now lay shattered at his feet. In its place was something raw and vulnerable, a heart laid bare before a woman who had never experienced such tenderness. You are my mate, he repeated, his voice quivering with urgency. It isn't merely a matter of destiny. It is an undeniable truth that binds us together, that transforms us both. I cannot bear the thought of you continuing to suffer alone, of your light being snuffed out by a world that would cast you aside. For a moment, Raven felt the weight of his words settle around her, mingling with the remnants of fear and sorrow. The confession was overwhelming, a torrent of emotion that forced her to confront the possibility that her pain might be the very crucible from which a new beginning could emerge. Yet, even as part of her yearned to believe him, another part of her recoiled. The scars of her past had taught her to guard her heart, to keep hope at bay like a distant, untrustworthy melody. Why would you care so much about me? She stammered, her voice barely more than a whisper, laden with the uncertainty of a lifetime spent doubting her worth. I am nothing but a broken soul, unworthy of love. Her words tumbled out, each one heavy with the despair of years where cruelty had defined her existence. Lucian stepped closer, his eyes softening as he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek in a gesture that was as tender as it was defiant. Because you are the one who has shown me what true resilience looks like. In you, I see not a broken soul, but a spirit that has endured the unendurable and emerged with a light that no darkness can extinguish. His voice, low and earnest, reverberated within the chamber, a solemn vow that transcended the barriers of their disparate worlds. In that intimate moment, as their eyes locked, the tension between them shifted, evolving into a powerful, undeniable connection. The vulnerability on display was raw and unfiltered, a clear admission that both were at a crossroads of fate and emotion. Lucian's confession was not just an assertion of a mystical bond. It was a declaration of his commitment to protect and nurture that bond, no matter the cost. Raven's internal walls, long built to shield her from pain and betrayal, began to crack under the force of his sincerity. She saw in his eyes not arrogance or dominion, but a wellspring of empathy and understanding, a warmth that promised safety from the endless cycles of abuse and abandonment that had defined her past. Despite her lingering doubts, a spark of hope ignited within her, fragile but undeniable. As the silence stretched between them, filled with the electric pulse of unspoken promises and future possibilities, both Raven and Lucian recognized that their lives were irreversibly intertwined. In that confession lay the potential for redemption, a chance for both to break free from the chains of their pasts and forge a future defined not by cruelty, but by an unbreakable bond of love and mutual healing. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Raven allowed herself to consider that love might be more than a distant myth. And in the tender vulnerability of that night, beneath the watchful gaze of a world that had once forsaken her, she began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she could be loved, and that in that love, she might finally discover a strength that Raven's acceptance, embracing her power and future. Under the celestial glow of a full moon, Raven stood before the ancient stone mirror of Lucian's inner sanctum, confronting her reflection for the very first time without the layers of despair that had once defined her existence. No longer did the tired eyes of a broken orphan gaze back. Instead, there shone a fierceness, a strength reborn from the ashes of suffering. The transformation that had begun in those private moments had reached its zenith. Her body pulsed with life, and she could feel the raw power of her lineage flowing through her veins, awakening her inner wolf to its full majesty. It started subtly that fateful night, when the latent magic of her blood had summoned a shiver from deep within, and, now, standing amidst flickering candlelight and gentle whispers of ancient spells, Raven fully embraced her metamorphosis. The tingling in her fingertips had given way to a profound sensation of empowerment. Her senses sharpened, her heartbeat steady and strong, and her eyes now reflecting a deep, luminous intensity, a mirror to the soul of a warrior reborn. That exalted moment, she realized that she was no longer the powerless rogue of her past. She was a queen in the making, destined to rule not by cruelty, but by resilience and strength. Lucian stood beside her, his presence unwavering and suffused with gentle authority. His eyes, once guarded and intense with possessiveness, softened as he observed her transformation. Here was a woman who had weathered endless storms, and now, in the brilliance of this lunar epiphany, she was reclaiming the spark of life that had always belonged to her. "Raven," he whispered, almost reverently, "you are not defined by the scars of your past, but by the power you now hold. You are my mate, my partner in strength and destiny, and no longer must you hide in the shadows of pain." Even as his words washed over her, a surge of conflicting emotions roiled within Raven. The journey to this moment had been fraught with heartache, betrayal, and a relentless struggle for survival. For so long, her identity had been tethered to the cruelty she had endured, a chain of endless torment. Yet now, with Lucian's steady hand guiding her, she saw a future where that chain could be shattered. Every fiber of her being vibrated with newfound energy and purpose as she allowed her consciousness to expand, accepting the call of her wolf within. The creature stirred beneath her skin, a magnificent, untamed spirit that roared silently with the promise of freedom and supremacy. As the transformation's full force unfurled, the once dim lines of her features sharpened into expressions of poise and determination. Raven's voice, when it finally emerged, was soft yet unwavering. "I accept it," she said, her tone imbued with both reverence and the quiet thrill of self-discovery. "I am more than what I have been told. I am powerful, and I am my own. I belong to no one but the strength of my spirit, and to you, if that is the bond fate has bestowed upon us." Lucian stepped forward, his own barriers now crumbling as he allowed his protective and possessive feelings to meld with genuine love. He wrapped his arms around her, a gesture both tender and transformative, as if in that embrace lay the promise of mutual healing. "Your strength mirrors the very essence of our lineage," he murmured against her ear. "Each moment your power grows, and with it, my resolve to stand by you, both as your protector and as your equal partner in this new world. We are destined to shape." In that intimate space, the storm of their emotions calmed into a serene, mutual understanding. Lucian's voice, resonant with the authority of a king tempered by compassion, filled the quiet chamber as he continued. "We have both endured more than most could ever imagine. But now, as you awaken to your true nature, you step into a light that has always been waiting for you. There is nothing more beautiful than a soul that conquers its own darkness. Today, you reclaim your destiny." The words, carried on the quiet breeze of the ancient castle, settled deeply into Raven's heart. The pain of her past, each lash, every moment of despair, melted away under the warmth of this newfound truth. With Lucian's guidance and unwavering belief in her, she felt the heavy burden of victimhood lift, replaced by the exhilaration of self-mastery. The magic within her surged like a river freed from its frozen hold, each pulse of energy affirming her right to command her own existence. The night deepened. The glow of the moon and the soft illumination of the chamber wove a tapestry of solace and power around them. The castle walls, once silent witnesses to torment, now echoed with a promise of rebirth and legacy. In this sacred space, where the echoes of the past were finally reconciled with the promise of the future, Lucian and Raven stood as living testaments to the resilience of the human and the wolf spirit. Their bond, born of cruelty and tempered by fire, was now sealed in a moment of quiet intimacy. Lucian's gentle caresses and soft whispers of admiration and commitment built an unassailable fortress around Raven's heart. It was in these final tender moments that she embraced not only the power of her transformation, but also the profound truth that she was no longer alone. In the serene silence of that night, everything changed. The painful chapters of her past gave way to the promise of a future where she was both a beacon and a warrior. Together, they looked out onto the vast, starlit sky, a horizon that whispered of challenges yet to come, but also of limitless possibilities. Raven's acceptance of her true self and her destiny as Lucian's mate was complete, and as they pressed their foreheads together in a final, affirming gesture, it was clear that a new era had dawned, a time where their united strength would forge a future of healing, triumph, and enduring love. Conclusion: the future of Lucian and Raven. Under a vast expanse of starlit skies, the echoes of past hardships slowly faded into the quiet murmur of a new dawn. Lucian and Raven stood hand in hand on the highest balcony of the castle, where the cool night air carried away the lingering sorrows of yesterday and whispered promises of a future filled with possibility. Together, they gazed out over the illuminated valley below, a realm transformed by their joint strength and determination, yet still fraught with challenges that lay ahead. In that serene moment, the bond between them felt unbreakable. Lucian's steady grip on Raven's hand was a constant reminder of his unwavering dedication to protect her and nurture the fierce light that had blossomed within her soul. His eyes, gentle yet penetrating, reflected a myriad of emotions. Resolute determination, mingled with tender affection, and the quiet hope of a future they could both shape. It was in this shared silence that they found a mutual understanding, a promise that no matter what adversities might come, they would face them together, united as one formidable force. Raven, once a broken soul condemned to a life of sorrow, had now become a beacon of resilience and power. Her journey of transformation had not been an easy one. It had been marked by pain, uncertainty, and moments when the darkness threatened to reclaim her. Yet, With each scar that had once defined her suffering, she had learned to find the strength to rise. Now, as she looked at Lucian, she saw not only the king who had saved her life, but also the partner with whom she could build a future free of the chains of her past. In his presence, her doubts began to dissolve, replaced by a burgeoning belief in her worth and her ability to create change, both within herself and the world around her. Their path forward would not be one of unchallenged serenity. The remnants of a cruel system, the legacy of oppression, and the ever-present threats from a world that had long oppressed rogues all loomed as obstacles. Yet, rather than casting a shadow over their future, these challenges only served to fortify their resolve. They knew that the journey ahead would demand sacrifices, courage, and a continual reaffirmation of their bond. But in that shared vow of unity, they discovered a peace that was as profound as it was transformative. Lucian spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of a promise as ancient as the stones of his kingdom. There will be battles ahead. Challenges we cannot yet foresee, he admitted, his tone both humble and resolute. But together, we will forge a new way, a path where our strength and our love can heal the wounds of the past and light the way to a brighter future. His words, infused with both hope and determination, resonated deeply in Raven's heart, reinforcing the truth that their union was not merely an escape from their former lives, but the beginning of a legacy built on trust, passion, and unyielding. Raven's gaze met his, and in that moment, the silence of the night was filled with unspoken understanding. The ghosts of her past, every harsh command, every tear-stained night, faded away into memory as she allowed herself to fully embrace her destiny. "I am not the woman I once was," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have found my strength, and I am ready to build the future I deserve, with you." Her words, tender yet resolute, echoed in the cool night air, a testament to the transformative power of love and acceptance. Together, they descended from the balcony, each step forward a declaration of hope and renewal. The grand hall of the castle, once a place of silent echoes and forgotten dreams, now buzzed with quiet energy, an energy that promised new beginnings and brave endeavors. Courtiers and servants alike whispered tales of the king's remarkable compassion and the fierce spirit of the woman by his side. Whispers that, though still tentative, hinted at a turning point in the realm, where even the most embattled souls could rise from the ashes of their past. As they moved through the halls, hand in hand, Lucian and Raven felt the future beckoning, a future that was as unpredictable as it was bright. They knew that obstacles remained, that the scars of a turbulent past were not easily erased. But within the sanctuary of their love, they had discovered an enduring power, one that could challenge the darkness and inspire those who had long been forgotten. In the final tender moments of that night, as they paused to share one last quiet embrace before stepping out to face the challenges of tomorrow, the weight of uncertainty softened into hope. Their hearts beat as one, echoing the rhythms of a destiny written not by cruelty or sorrow, but by love, resilience, and the promise of a new era. With the gentle murmur of the castle as their witness, Lucian and Raven sealed their bond with a whispered promise that together they would face whatever the future held, their unity shining as a beacon of hope for all those waiting to be saved. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, it cast a warm glow on a future yet unwritten, a future where every challenge was met with steadfast hearts, and every tear, once shed in despair, transformed into the fuel for an unyielding and triumphant love.